Welcome to our November seminar on Main Street design and active transportation. Actually, Catherine, could I have you letting in everyone else who comes in a bit later? Awesome, thank you.
Sure.
Awesome, thank you. So yes, welcome. We have some excellent seminars for you set up today. And this is on the subject of Main Street design, active transportation, and the like. We are ITE York University student chapter, the student chapter of the Institute of Transportation Engineers and York University's community of transportation professionals. We host seminars, do software tutorials, and in nicer times, host field trips, volunteering, and other social events. Membership is free, so feel free to check us out at ite.club.yorku.ca. Also, check us out on campus groups if you're a York University student. If you're viewing us on YouTube live and you're not a York University student, be sure to subscribe to stay in the know as to when our next live streams are. So with that out of the way, I think we'll go straight to introducing our speakers for today. We have a total of 5 speakers each, and these 5 speakers will be delivering 3 presentations. So we have Niki who's a senior project manager from the City of Toronto, and Saikat Basak, also a senior project manager from the City of Toronto. They'll be presenting the planning and delivery of the Destination Danforth Complete Street Pilot Project as part of the COVID-19 response in the City of Toronto. Niki is a senior project manager at the City of Toronto's Transportation Services, the Major Projects Unit. She has more than 8 years of professional and research experience in sustainable transportation planning and design across Canada. Her work experience involves working in multidisciplinary teams of engineers and planners on policy development, major planning and feasibility studies, and all stages of detailed design. Throughout her academic and professional career, Niki has focused on bridging broader policy and planning with design and practice. Saikat is a senior project manager at the City of Toronto Transportation Services, focusing on planning, design, and implementation of active transportation infrastructure. Over the last 10 years, Saikat was involved in developing 40+ kilometers of active transportation projects in the city. Overall, he has over 15 years experience in transportation safety, planning, and design sectors, and worked in public and private sectors. Saikat completed a master's in transportation engineering from the University of Toronto and is a registered professional engineer and project management professional. And with that, I think we'll turn it over to Niki and Saikat for their presentation. So I'll end share screen and perfect.
Sure. So just wanted to make sure that you guys can see our screen. Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for inviting us for this exciting opportunity to present Niki and our project, my project, to this beautiful and nice audience from York University and other folks from around the world, I assume. So Niki and I will probably make somewhere around like 20 minutes presentation, mostly on the Danforth Complete Street Pilot Project within the overview of the pandemic response from City of Toronto. So let's look into the agenda items. So we are going to be start with the providing a context of how the Danforth Complete Street Pilot Project started with within the scope of response on the COVID-19 pandemic in the city, and then for Danforth project, we are going to provide a background, planning, design, and implementation, and the current monitoring and evaluation that is going on right now. So, as you know, in the city, COVID, it hard hit mostly in March this year, and then back in April, based on all the background works that city did with the overview of the literature review and other major cities were doing on. That in April 2020, City Council directed transportation services in coordination with public health to develop a comprehensive plan to for a citywide recovery plan and mostly to create more space for pedestrians, cyclists, and public transit users, so that would allow for better physical distancing. So with that in mind, City Council also directed transportation services to fast-track cycling delivery projects. So that was back in April. And then within April and May, City staff basically developed a plan, which is called an Active TO plan. I'm going to explain that in the next slide in a second. And as part of the Active TO project, Danforth Avenue between Broadview and Dawes Road was one of them to implement mostly cycle tracks and implement a complete street project. So that's kind of like the background. And in terms of the implementation, as I just mentioned, that Active TO project is a coordinated approach between Toronto Public Health and Transportation Services, mostly to create space for physical distancing and to promote active transportation. And within this project category, there are like 3 specific type of projects. The first is the quiet street, which is mostly the neighborhood streets, where, as you can see on the picture top right, that on these streets, we installed some barrels to slow down the motor vehicles, create a safer space for the road users by slowing down the motor vehicles, and allow the people from the neighborhood to gather on the street in a physically distanced way. So that's the quiet street, and about 50 lane kilometer of quiet street projects have been implemented in 25 wards all over the city. In terms of the major road closures, which is the second item, so these are the major roads, those were along, mostly along the waterfront, like Lakeshore Boulevard, and these were closed on weekends and holidays starting from the spring to all the way until last month. And for this corridor, because these are also connected with the major recreational trails like Martin Goodman Trail along the waterfront corridor and the Lower Don Trail, these people gave people opportunity to either bike or run or walk in a physically distanced way. And the third category is the cycling network expansion, which we will be mostly talking about here. And through an accelerated installation, we installed about 25 lane kilometer of cycling network on all the arterial streets in the city. I'm going to talk about that in a while in some of my next slides. So with that background in place, we started working on a Danforth Avenue complete street study and implemented a pilot. So let's provide a context. Let's look into the, where this Danforth Avenue is located if you guys are not familiar. So as you can see in this map, Danforth Avenue is located along here at the east end of downtown Toronto. This is along a major arterial, and Bloor Danforth subway line is under Danforth Avenue. And as you can see from this map, that Danforth is one of the 7 or 8 major corridors which were selected for the Active TO cycling network implementation projects, along with some other corridors further west, like Bloor East and Bloor West, and some other corridors outside downtown Toronto, like Brimley Avenue. So all of these are along major transit corridors, either over the subway line or on the major bus corridors. And one of the objective is to take the pressure off from the public transit system and make people to use active transportation in a physically distanced way. So with that in mind, actually the Danforth study started before the COVID pandemic hit all over the world. We started in 2019, but at that time, the Danforth Complete Street project was part of a threefold project jointly initiated by city planning, which included a planning component to how the built form along Danforth would be developed in terms of like zoning and high density, all kind of like the land use and planning stuffs, that those kind of related initiatives, and economic development through a retail study, economic revitalization study. And as part of the transportation component, we included a potential pilot project back in 2019. But at that time in 2019, we didn't know the exact length and location of the pilot. Then COVID started in early 2020. And we had to basically fast track all our works, but at the same time, to make sure that all our Complete Street project initiative is also providing the necessity that is required by COVID-19. So as many of the transportation students know, that a Complete Street is basically a component where you provide the facility for all road users, not just one type of the road users like the cars, but here in terms of providing the facility for all road users, one of the major objectives is to provide road safety, which is mostly done through reducing speed and providing separation for all road users in dedicated spaces, provide environmental sustainability by reducing emissions, maybe by moving users more into cycling, pedestrian activities and public transit, and providing livability initiatives like making it a destination for that particular street. So with that in mind, there are also additional goals that we had to provide as part of the Complete Street project by providing a better use of the right-of-way in the context of COVID. One of them is to support the local businesses by improving access in terms of like creating more open space and accessible spaces in front of the stores, and providing loading opportunities, providing expanded patios and outdoor seating opportunities. As you know, Danforth corridor has a lot of restaurants, providing physical distancing for active mode of transportation, and especially providing physical separation. And as I mentioned earlier, that this project would provide a relief to the transit system and providing sustainable alternatives for the people who are not comfortable using transit by walking and cycling. And not last and not the least is to provide more space for public realm opportunities. So with that, I'm going to just provide a quick overview, which Niki is going to build on how we provided the Complete Street on Danforth Avenue. So before we implemented the Complete Street pilot, Danforth was a 4-lane mostly for car traffic. There were wider car lanes which were used for off-peak parking. There are some Complete Street elements on the car side, including street furniture and some street trees with some patios for businesses. But there was like the pedestrian crossing distance was pretty wide, like over 16 meters, and there was no dedicated cycling infrastructure. And in terms of the traffic volume that you can see at the bottom left of this slide, there are a significant users for pedestrians and cyclists along with the motor vehicle users. And as I mentioned earlier, that there is the Danforth subway line is right under Danforth Avenue, which had a significant amount of users, and actually that's higher than some of the above the ground users. And the last consideration for the Complete Street movement is the safety aspect of it. We found out that pedestrians and cyclists, they were about 25% of the Danforth users, whereas they have about 75% of all the collisions that results in serious injury and fatality. So all of these played into providing a complete street planning, design, and implementation, which Niki is going to explain right now. Niki, over to you.
Thank you, Saikat. So as Saikat mentioned, I'll get into the planning, design, and implementation of the Danforth Complete Street Pilot. Next slide, Saikat. So there was a fair bit of engagement that went in on this project through the Danforth study, which, as Saikat mentioned, started in 2019. And so people had envisioned something that was a bit more unique than a typical cycle track implementation. People wanted more art, they wanted more greenery, they wanted a focus on patios, which are a big part of the culture and history of Danforth. And so we had a fair bit of understanding of what people wanted along the Danforth before the pandemic hit, and we were directed to accelerate the pilot. So this slide just shows some of what was done prior to our sort of accelerated implementation. Next slide. And so ultimately, when council directed us to install the pilot along the entire corridor, which we were not anticipating to do this year, we had to develop a preferred design option that incorporated the feedback we had received as part of the Danforth study. And so in this cross-section you see, or this perspective, you see that we tried to maximize parking on the street by providing it on both sides in a symmetrical way that also allowed for expanded patios on both sides. I'll show you that in a bit. We wanted to use physical barriers that protected the cyclists, such as curbstones, but also beautified the corridor. So where we had enough space in the buffer, using planters. And loading was also a really big part of the project. Loading is often a challenge with the implementation of complete street pilots on main streets. There's a lot of business activity and a lot of diverse interests and needs along the corridor, and so loading needed to be thought about. So next slide. Some of the pilot elements that we incorporated are shown in this slide. So you'll see that there's a protected cycle track to support the safety goals of the project. There's also curb extensions to, again, support safety from a pedestrian point of view by tightening up right turns. In order to bring in that beautification and desire for street art, we made these curb extensions artistic curb extensions using a thermoplastic treatment and a pattern. And these were customized for each BIA along the corridor. We also did incorporated signal timing modifications, turn lane adjustments at all intersections, 24/7 parking on both sides of Danforth, as you're probably mostly aware along most of Toronto's arterials. Peak hour parking is non-existent. Often it becomes a no stopping zone in order to facilitate 2 lanes of traffic flow. In our case, we converted the bylaws to allow for 24/7 parking, which provides some additional time for all businesses to have that service. It also allows for those types of patios to be supported in the roadway. We also obviously looked at adding bike parking along the corridor and other opportunities. We have a video that sort of gets into some of these details, so I won't focus too much on this slide. Saikat, if you want to take us to the next slide, this is just to show you something you'll also see in the video. This is unique to Danforth and unique to the city of Toronto this year. For the pandemic, we accommodated expanded patios in the roadway. And what was extra challenging for Danforth was that we were, of course, also implementing a cycle track at the same time. And so we had to create 2 layers of this, 2 scenarios for the street, where we put down the pavement markings for an ultimate streetscape that had parking on both sides and a cycle track, but then we used these physical barriers to deviate the cycle track around patios where businesses applied for them, and we were able to accommodate them safely. And so this rendering shows the expanded patio option, which at the time when we were designing it wasn't even permitted by public health officials, but we knew that it was something that was of interest from the business community as well as public health when we were moving from stage 1 to stage 2. But I'll get into some of the more detailed stuff in our monitoring and evaluation in the next couple slides. Next slide. So as I'm sure you're all aware, there are some key parts to a successful pilot, and of course it's the use of temporary materials that allow flexibility. A 12-month installation, especially in a winter climate, is key so that we capture the various seasonal challenges that come our way. Evaluation using before and after data, as well as continual monitoring of the corridor in this case is key in order so that we're making adjustments to the corridor. And finally, taking in consultation and feedback from stakeholders. Next slide. So to date, even though the pilot has only been in for in its entirety really for only a month or a couple months, we've already made quite a few changes because we had to design the project in such a short time. We knew that it was going to be an iterative design process once it was installed to get things right. So we've received concerns and challenges around the corridor from road users, business owners, stakeholders, related to safety, accessibility, vehicle sightline concerns, as well as the design of the patio zones, which, as I mentioned, were very new for the City of Toronto. So staff took in these concerns and already made some physical modifications to the pilot. We continue to monitor and analyze this feedback that we receive to understand where we need to make additional adjustments. Next slide. Going forward, we'll be evaluating the project, which will go to council. It's a 1-year pilot with a report to council with the final evaluation and recommendation at the end of next year. And so these are some of the criteria that we'll be looking at. And the criteria include, obviously, first and foremost, safety using collision data, volume counts, that allow us to understand any impact to adjacent street networks, vehicle traffic congestion, which is a bit of a moving target in the context of COVID-19. Public perception and level of support of the project will be measured in a number of ways. We've already done intercept surveys of users along the corridor that we try to capture within the, kind of big patio season in the middle of summer. We'll also be doing additional online surveys and consultation on public support in other ways. Economic impact will be measured using customer spending data. However, again, in the context of the pandemic, it's very, very challenging to determine what a success versus a failure might be in terms of economic impact. Really, this is going to be a general measure that will likely not have any sort of final answer, but will be more of an indicator for the project. Finally, curbside demands such as parking and loading will be evaluated at an observational and qualitative level. Next slide. So I guess this takes us to the end. The next steps for us are to continue monitoring and evaluating the pilot and to report back to the public as well as council in next year on our efforts and final recommendation for what to do once the year is over. And so do you have any questions, I guess, is the next.
Actually, I'm hoping that we could actually save all of our questions to the very end, if that's all right. After all 3 presentations have gone through, we can have everyone come back as a panel of all the speakers for one big question session. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
All right, awesome. So I'm going to go back and introduce us to our next speakers, because we have another presentation coming up next. And coming up next is Rethinking Parking Strategies and Planning for Change. This is Historic Kleinburg Village in Vaughan, presented by Paul Grove and Mohammed Delabasic. So Paul is a registered professional planner with background experience in transportation planning in the private sector, completing in project managing master plan and secondary plan studies, transportation studies for development applications, parking studies, transportation demand management plans, and transportation design. In his current role at the City of Vaughan, Paul acts as the TDM coordinator, reviewing development applications and advising on active transportation citywide. Paul also project manages key city projects, including the Kleinburg parking strategy and TDM guideline. And Mohammed has worked on projects encompassing a broad range of transportation fields, including transportation master plans, parking studies, municipal and provincial class environmental assessments, transportation demand and traffic management, transportation urban planning and development application approvals, transit projects, preliminary and detailed highway and road design, transportation impact and traffic safety studies, and traffic operation studies. Mohammed is a longtime advocate and volunteer in the engineering community and professional associations. And with that, I will hand the controls over to them for their presentation.
Okay. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Appreciate you taking the time to listen to our presentation. My name is Paul Grove. As introduced, I'm the TDM coordinator at the City of Vaughan, and I was the project manager for the Kleinburg parking strategy, which we'll be presenting to you today. I'm joined by Mohammed from McIntosh Perry, who is the project manager on the McIntosh Perry end of things. So with that, we'll dive right in. Just a quick outline for today. So we'll be starting by providing some background, some context on historic districts generally, some of the issues and challenges that these spaces face from a transportation perspective, and the vision for these spaces and how we want to plan for the future of how these places are to evolve. We'll present Kleinburg Village in Vaughan as a case study and provide you some background on the village, and then discuss some of the current conditions and behaviors that we observed through our study. From that point, I'll hand things over to Mohammed, who will walk you through the solutions and the recommendations that emerged from our study, ending off with implementation strategies and then some lessons learned from our project. Next slide. So just a bit of background on our historic districts. So they're often these vital spaces that provide these important places to gather, to socialize. They foster small businesses, and we find that they're often the backbones, the centers of our municipalities. But what we also find of these types of areas, these historic districts, is that they all share similar characteristics when it comes to transportation, and that's largely a result of that these historic, compact, intimate places are being asked to accommodate ever-increasing demand when it comes to parking and transportation. And it becomes this act of balancing this ever-increasing demand with these fairly restrictive areas in terms of their build form. So then these spaces are challenged to uphold that build form, uphold that character that we cherish so much of them as we continue to place more demand upon them. So the question then becomes, is this approach sustainable? Can we continue to just increase supply to meet demand in these types of spaces where we may not have the luxury of space to provide such spaces? Next slide. Oops, thank you. So what is the vision for these types of areas? What do we want them to become? And the answer to that more than often is that we want them to mimic or return to what is their original intention, that is to be explored on foot, more of a human scale, pedestrian oriented space. We don't want them just to become fancy parking lots, and that's certainly not what we want to have of Kleinburg Village. So then how do we achieve this transition? As at least in the City of Vaughan's context, we have a historic district that's emerged in a rapidly urbanizing but suburban area. And how do we transition it from auto orientation to that more of a pedestrian space? And this is where parking can play a key role in that. Is of course we have to accommodate this demand for parking, but at the same time we can begin to rethink our typical approaches to just increasing supply to meet demand on how to strategize and achieve this vision that we have for this space. Next slide. So Kleinburg Village in Vaughan, just a bit of background, it's considered the gem of our municipality. It's our premier historic district. There's a wide range of land uses, including retail, restaurants, there's various tourist attractions, there's art galleries, a public school, and other city community facilities. But it is immersed in a very rapidly urbanizing area, being the greater Kleinburg. And as we continue to move forward with Kleinburg Village, and as we continue to hear from the BIA and the residents and other stakeholders in the area, the more we begin to understand that it's not as simple as increasing parking supply. It's about changing the image, changing the feel of the village. Next slide. So just a bit more background before we start diving into some of the technical findings. So Kleinburg Village itself, the built form does remain quite stable, and that's largely to do with the historic designations of the village and many of the sites within the village. As well, there is some stable residential uses that surround the main corridor, the main street. So overall, the built form of Kleinburg Village, we don't anticipate to change very much into the future. The village is located along Islington Avenue, which is the main street through the village. It's a 2-lane major arterial road, and it is a major commuter route as well. So it does carry significant traffic, particularly during peak periods. And of course, we do expect Kleinburg and the surrounding area. You can see some of the subdivisions to the north and south. We anticipate these areas to continue to grow and continue to urbanize. And much of what we've seen in the village today has been fairly organic, unmitigated or influenced behavior with respect to parking, which we have found leads to this perception that parking is in critical short supply, and that some of our typical approaches to building more parking might not be the best way to go moving forward. Next slide. We'll provide a snapshot here of some of our high-level findings. These are observed through on-site observations as well as in consultation with the community. So we've divided our findings into 3 main categories. We have parking, traffic, and active transportation. And with respect to parking, we found that there's competitive demand or high demand in these hotspot areas. There's quite a bit of illegal parking going on, whether that's people parking for too long or in areas they're not permitted. Parking is fairly disorganized. It's not clear where you can park or for how long, so you kind of find parking all over the place. And then there's other specific issues in certain areas, being the post office and the school. With respect to traffic, as discussed, Islington Avenue is a major commuter route. There is heavy traffic along the corridor. And what this does is it just exacerbates all the other issues. So as people try to circulate the village to find parking, they're met with congestion, and vice versa. When people are backing into and out of parking spaces on street, they're just further interrupting the flow of traffic. So it's the interaction between these 2 activities. And then finally, on active transportation, we have heavy pedestrian demand in the village, which is good. That's what we want. But the issue is that because of all this automotive demand, it creates an environment that's not particularly safe or perhaps enjoyable. So we have people parking on sidewalks where they're supposed to be on the boulevard. There's limited crossing opportunities throughout the village, and bicycle parking and other facilities are also lacking as well. Next slide. And here's a few findings from our online survey. So we conducted 2 rounds of online surveys where I think we reached over between 300 and 400 respondents. So there's a lot of popularity on this subject in the city. I won't discuss all of these, but just a quick snapshot. So as expected, most people do stay between 1 to 3 hours for your shopping and dining kind of exploration. But a significant number still are there for 15 minutes or less. So picking up or dropping off at the school, getting their mail from the post office, and so on and so forth. Parking on Islington Avenue on the main street is the most sought after location for parking. Roughly 1/3 of people park on street or indicated as such. And most do find parking rather quickly within 5 minutes or less. However, it's worth noting that a considerable number take over 10 minutes to find a parking space, which is quite a substantial amount of time. It indicates that there's some frustration going on in Kleinburg. Next slide. And just to round things off in terms of the consultation, so we also held numerous stakeholder meetings, some public meetings. There was an intercept survey done as well, and much of what we found through that consultation echoed and mirrored what we found on site and through our online survey program as well. Next slide. So now getting down into the numbers. So Kleinburg Village provides about 750 total parking spaces. However, we should note that private off-street parking comprises the vast majority of that supply. So it's about 530 spaces that are private off-street parking spaces reserved for those individual establishments. So what that leaves us is a public parking supply that's primarily on-street parking on Islington Avenue, 129 spaces. There is other parking at city-owned facilities as well as at Binder Twine Park, as labeled there on the figure. But the parking at these facilities are typically reserved for events or are located too distantly from the village core and are not considered desirable parking locations. So really what this results in is that the majority of people are then competing for on-street parking right on Islington Avenue. Next slide. Following our demand surveys, so there was quite a comprehensive demand survey program conducted during the summer, the fall, as well as during a special event. We conducted weekday and weekend surveys throughout the summer and fall. And you can see here just a glimpse of the results at an aggregated level. So the total occupancy peak during the fall weekend was about 55%. So at surface value, you might think, well, there's plenty of parking left over in the village, so what's the problem? But if we start looking at it at a more disaggregated level, you can see that the public parking on street supply starts creeping up there. It's about 73%, and it's consistently high through our survey period. So it was at this point we started asking ourselves, okay, what's really going on here? So like we have all this residual parking, you know, what's the major concern? Next slide. And that's where we can start to understand maybe a little bit of what's going on here. So we can see the parking demand visualized in Kleinburg, and you can see that a lot of the off-street public parking lots have green or yellow boxes, and that's because they're not in very high demand. But the on-street parking spaces, those are in quite high demand, particularly within what we've called this hotspot at Kellam Street and Islington Avenue. Most people are competing for parking in this area just due to some of the land uses there, the level of convenience and everything else. So what happens is because everyone's competing for these same parking spaces and because there's this lack of legibility or direction over where you can park in the village, what we find is everyone just crowds these few areas, and it leads to this idea that parking is severely lacking. And granted, people are facing quite a bit of frustration because of the lack of direction and legibility of the village. And it's also worth noting that each end of the village is actually within about a 5-minute walk of either end. So there's lots of opportunity here to park in quite some distance, but then, you know, you're walking from one end to the other. It's still within a reasonable time frame. So part of this is as much education as it is kind of strategizing how can we begin to change some behaviors here. Next slide. So wrapping up the existing conditions, so we identified a list of existing issues. I won't dive into each one, but we'll just list some of them off. So we have the hotspot competition, as we already discussed, public parking not being widely available, signage and pavement markings are lacking, traffic volumes are high on Islington Avenue, and there's some safety concerns present with respect to active transportation. Next slide. Of course, every time you have an issues list, you have to have an opportunities list. So our opportunities, building off of the issues, were, of course, to improve parking and travel efficiency through signage and wayfinding, something that's lacking today. Targeting and managing visitor groups, such as either employees, those valeting for restaurants, these kinds of things, to free up some of the parking on Islington or more desirable parking. Promoting underused parking, improving the supply of public parking, TDM, establishing a pedestrian-oriented public realm. This is kind of now starting to bring in more of that vision of what we have for Kleinburg in the longer term. And you know, this includes other things such as leveraging micromobility, even reducing or eliminating traffic as much as we can on Islington Avenue, and then some other things there with respect to potentially paid parking in the future and updating our policies to support all of these other physical improvements. Next slide. So then, understanding now the issues and the challenges and what we want to do with Kleinburg, how do we start to bridge the gap? How do we get from one to the other? So the city is planning to do a major reconstruction of Islington Avenue. This is a result of having to replace a water main. But to replace this water main, we actually have to rip up the entire roadway, the whole right of way from building face to building face. So it presents this incredible opportunity to go back in and reconstruct Islington Avenue as this space that we want, not one of, you know, a disorganized parking lot essentially, but one of where there's a clear message to visitors that this is a pedestrian-oriented space, that we understand this is it's meant to be explored on foot. The public realm is the most important, and so the intention is we want to marry as many solutions as we can through this exercise to begin to achieve this transition. And to discuss all these solutions with you, I'm going to now hand things over to Mohammed.
Thank you, Paul. I will just take it from here. And that's, as you probably could realize, there was a significant challenges for here for us to, based on all those, I think particularly, as Paul mentioned, perception, there are issues, and we knew from beginning there are issues. I mean, we started this study and how to solve that. So there was we work really hard with BIA and other stakeholders in order to kind of like address their concern. There are parking issues. There is lack of parking in the area. They had to maintain a business. There is a very busy traffic in that Islington corridor, so it's very slow through the area. So with all those, we did those surveys and we realized that sports it's not exactly kind of like we understand from the engineering and technical part, but it's hard to explain and kind of like pass that message. There are parking, but solutions needs to be focused on not everything that issue is in that hotspot or central area. So if people walk like 200-300 meters or 100 meters in some cases from the destination or the store or restaurant, there is a capacity. So we can like start looking how we can address those, what we to improve this. So we decided to go through the different phases, horizon, what can be done immediately, the fastest way. So right now, I mean, we kind of like pretty much finished this study last month or month before. So what we can do, let's say now, from November and the next phase immediately to make it happen. So those immediate solutions as I go, what will be the fastest way, and also the kind of like implement that can be addressed and improve situation. We didn't count on COVID, of course, but so as Paul mentioned, there was that city completed or already kind of done before our study a streetscape plan. So that streetscape plan was pretty much kind of like waiting for this parking study to see what our findings or recommendations, so that we can work together, so the cities can go and in general improve not only parking, but improve streetscaping, improve boulevards and so on in this beautiful historic area. So one of these immediate solutions what we came is kind of like do right away what we can do with those improving boulevards, or removing in some cases cars parking on the boulevard, and implement laybys, improve pedestrian linkage, or make it more safe and so on. So those are kind of like some of the immediate solutions that can work right away with city streetscape plan, and also some of those kind of like immediate solutions are wayfinding. So as Paul mentioned, there was really it's when you drive there and you go there, you have a hard time to figure out is there parking along the street or behind this business building or on the next street, or there's no signage and there is no payment markings to really guide you through the area. It is small area, but sometimes you spend 5-10 minutes to go through and figure out is there parking or not. And as I said, Islington Avenue is very busy, and once you are in that kind of like queue, long line through the area, it needs you like 15 minutes to go around and again to get on the Islington Avenue to do that kind of like look for the parking again. So we look in those hotspots area, what Paul mentioned. So that's kind of like the central part of the Kleinburg village. But we look what can be done in some other areas. Through the study, we identify some areas that can be really easily implemented, and they are there. Some in, like I said, 5 minutes walking around, there are opportunities to make some centralized parking. So there is an old fire hall owned by the city. Maybe that can be fast addressed or implemented, kind of like a centralized parking. or private partnership with some private owners. That can be a large private venue is there. So when we look that parking, it's owned by private restaurant or a motel or whatever for events. But in many, most of time, it's sitting there kind of like empty, except those special events or special weddings or so. So the Kansas City work with private owners to work on the providing parking. Some boulevards area that again are not so far from central kind of like business or everything what's happening in Kleinburg. Can there we estimated kind of like approximately 50 on-street parking can be implemented here, or some kind of like create centralized parking that it's again within City Boulevard and so on. So we look at those solutions that can be implemented immediately. As kind of like for many from the technical part, we develop criteria how we're gonna evaluate those solutions. We will go through those, like I said, immediate, medium, and long term. That we look up to 2041. Actually, what can be addressed here. So we develop those criteria: technical, social, cost, of course, what is going to be cost to implement all this, and what parking solutions. So as I mentioned, or Paul, parking restrictions, public parking lot, paid parking, parking structure, parking partnership, laybys, and payment markings, signage, and some mobility infrastructure. We look also those what can be done with those smart applications, smart technology going forward in the future. So going forward through all those solutions, we went through the evaluation process and the score and so on based on the technical and all those criteria. For immediate solutions, as I mentioned, the fast way is really to look for the improving wayfinding, working with that streetscape plan, improve some, to remove some of those on-street parking and to maybe to move them immediately from those hotspot area that can be implemented on the through the streetscape plan to build the laybys, so that that can improve also traffic, pedestrian activity, safety, and so on. For the future parking solutions, so that kind of like we look, as I said, again, for the future, we look at medium term, which is again more than 5 years in the future, and also 5 to 10 years. So we look from the planning part, what city has the plan for their development in the area, developed area, including the village. It is historic area, so there are those unique buildings that needs to maintain that kind of like historic look and view. So, but again, how to keep or attract more visitors and to keep those businesses, so that we work in the future. What city is planning, as I said, or Paul said, around the area there are new developments. However, it needs to maintain that historic village, but we have to see what future businesses are planning in their area, and also how that fit in the future parking demand and parking requirements and bylaws and so on. In the medium long term, through all those kind of like horizons, or the ultimate goal is we have to maintain this historic village in that kind of like what to attract visitors, but to make it more that it's more pedestrian oriented, so that in over phases as we go through this implementation, but it's pretty much how it can happen that we have this village or just almost like car-free zone. So but it's not easy to implement. Like it needs significant work with business community, significant work with road improvement in the area, because Islington Avenue is still a main corridor that goes through the village. So, and how we rethink to work in the phases to improve the village, to improve pedestrian activity, and improve parking, so that through the medium and long-term direction, that was really focused to make it more pedestrian oriented, the place that the people like to go, not only for the restaurant, but also its tourist area to attract more tourists to the area and so on. One of the medium long-term directions, but also to include those new ways of mobility, to introduce micro-mobility area, and that's kind of like the core of a village when that hotspot is. It's kind of like everything is happening. Islington Avenue, busy area with traffic, issues with parking, school, and so on. So city can implement those micro mobility area if we have parking, centralized parking, somewhere that is immediately next to that core village. People can come with car or transit and park and use those stations for the share mobility, to the bike share or those micro mobility. So there is a lot of opportunity for medium and long term that city can work through the programs, so the TDM measures and so on. So we look for those things, and that's kind of like a city would like to move forward, and as they start implementing somewhere else, to also to focus and implementing in the Kleinburg village. I mentioned those smart apps. It's this parking apps or the smart apps are really now implemented somewhere else, so that you can see on real time where the parking is available within village, so that you can really work on that way, where the parking and how many is available, so that those applications already exist, and in general in Ontario and around Toronto. So some municipality already have those pilot programs that they pretty much, it's easy to implement. And as you know, these days everything is tracking on the app. So that's also one of the solutions that can be implemented in the medium and long term. Ultimate goal, as I mentioned, is to make this place really more pedestrian friendly, so that residents and tourists can go there and walk and park in the kind of like immediately close to the village core, and walk through the area and have a place kind of like this destination to go and enjoy the historic. How that can be done, again, it's this is that Islington Avenue. This is our village. It is, as I said and Paul said, major traffic corridor. This is major mark. So in order to do those, what we said, improve pedestrian area and to reduce car, or at ultimate goal, it's really to make it a car-free zone in the long term, but needs significant improvements in the surrounding road network, improvements that can be also with transit. So if people are coming to this area, that they have other options to come, not by car only, by transit, and provide those centralized parking areas so that they can walk and so on. We went through the evaluation again for the medium and long terms. That's again, it goes 5 to 10 years, evaluated everything. That's again focuses opportunities for public-private partnership. Can city work with these private owners for some of these parking areas that they have, at least to use it in the time that it's out of events or whenever is possible. Focus on village square, as I said, make it a place that city can have some events there, or the village. So that's again more focus on pedestrians and focus on the businesses in the area and historic village. We went through those some options. I show it to develop old fire hall that can be as centralized parking. It's not far to walk, 5 minutes in the long term. We kind of like didn't focus. There is no kind of, when we looked the need for and the capacity parking structure, so we didn't kind of didn't score so high. And as you can see, the high score is really on the focusing on pedestrian-only village core. Implementation. There are a number of parallel projects that how it can be implemented. Infrastructure improvements. As I said, this cannot happen just kind of go and improve parking. There is a significant improvement required to improve the village boulevards, pedestrian activity, sidewalks, cycling facility. We also look as part of this is pedestrian safety, cycling safety, bicycle parkings in the area. So the infrastructure improvements will include not only kind of parking facilities, but other street improvements, boulevards, and so on. Work with policies and bylaw. So secondary plans, cash and lieu, zoning bylaw. So those also needs to go parallel to the improvements on update and monitoring. Similarly for Danforth, there is again, once our city start implementing this, how to monitor this again through the phases, monitor parking supply and demand over time. Things are changing, so it's consult with stakeholders. They are a really key point in everything. Business associations is very important here. We work with them, as I mentioned, through the parking, but they will be there and they will again monitor and this implementation, work with the city and update it. So lessons learned, briefly, it is, as I mentioned, it is historic place. It is really challenging to do some physical improvements. You have to maintain that historic character. There's not a lot of opportunities to go there and redevelop the area. So you have to keep that. The goal, as I said, it is to make it focus over a long time, more attractive for pedestrians, for active transportation, micromobility, and so on. So to make the place to go, to improve, if possible, that, or to have that square, that village will have a place, kind of like some other villages in the area, a place to go, events place, festival, and eventually to traffic detour from Islington Avenue in that area. So they improve other road networks. Parking is the sensitive issue, so it needs to be look for the future developments in the area, and also the most the other important lesson learned this year is really to work with the other stakeholders to bring them from day one into the consultation and so on. So that that's kind of like in general summary and lessons learned of our project. So with this one, I will again, I think we'll move to the questions session.
All right, thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much, both. And once again, hold your questions all the way till the end because we still have one more presentation. And then we'll come back to everyone for question period. So coming up next, we have planning and designing multimodal streets through a secondary plan process. And this will be presented by Sheikh Alam. He has more than 6 years of experience in transportation planning and engineering. Currently, he's working at the City of Toronto as a transportation planner, where his major responsibility is to conduct long-range transportation planning studies and development review. He holds a master's degree in transportation systems from KTH Royal Institute of Technology, that's in Stockholm, Sweden, and a master's degree in civil engineering focused on transportation engineering from Ryerson University. He is a professional engineer, and his main interests is in active transportation, transportation demand management, and transportation modeling. So with that, I think I'll hand the control over to Sheikh.
Timothy, can you please enable the share screen for me?
Oh, I see. Yes, 1 second. You should have access now.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Before I start, I just wanted to let you know that my kid is only 2 years. If you hear any scream behind, so she is bored, maybe staying at home. Just to let you know. Welcome everyone. Thanks ITE York University chapter just to organize and inviting us to present this seminar. As introduced by Timothy, I'm working in transportation planning department, City of Toronto. We are mostly doing long-term transportation master plan and development application review. So for this presentation, I'll be presenting mostly multimodal streets planning and designing through a secondary plan process. The secondary plan I chose is currently we have an ongoing study just Hill and Finch, just south of York University, which is Hill Finch Plus study. The secondary plan, as I would like to mention, that secondary plan is a land use plan for a particular area of a municipality that is prepared as an amendment to an official plan. Typically, a secondary plan will provide more detailed policies for the area it covers, such as public streets, parks, urban design, and other things. The next slide I have is mostly like what is multimodal street. As my colleague Niki and Shaikat already presented about this multimodal streets and planning and designing and implementation steps. So multimodal streets and complete street is the similar term. So as you see, mostly like multimodal streets offer people options for safe, attractive, and convenient travel by foot, cycle, transit, as well as like motorized vehicles, which move more people than street designed and prioritizing only for car modes. Repurposing street space for more efficient travel modes increase the total street capacity while reducing the personal motorized vehicles. As you can see in the left side, per hour capacity for different modes, where car is the lowest mode for using per lane capacity, and bikes and transit is like most likely like 5 to 8 times higher capacity than only private motor vehicles. On the right side, you can see the typical car-oriented street versus multimodal street. Just to understand, this is like a similar condition, like similar right-of-way streets. You can see the total capacity, like person capacity, is almost 3 times higher than the regular car-oriented street. So the secondary plan I was mentioned like last slide, that the study area context is mostly like Finch West subway station near to the York University, and where Finch LRT, future Finch LRT and Line 1 intersects. This is a mobility hub as well, identified by a regional transportation model, regional transportation plan. The area context, I'd like to give you some sort of context that this is a mixed use area nearby, and the land use is mostly like mixed for heavy and light industry on the east side of Kill. As you see, oil tankers on the east northeast side, and south side, like south of east side is mostly like a light industry side, whereas on the other hand, like west side is mostly apartment neighborhood, and like northwest side, and then southwest side is mostly like low density neighborhood. So definitely some of the key issues of existing condition is heavily car oriented places in the neighborhood scale. But there are definitely some high number of active transportation users. As you see, it's very close to the York University, and the neighborhood is like mostly like low-income people living there. But the people coming mostly working here on those industries is coming actually from York region. And the vehicles, commercial vehicles mostly, is very much slow because of the oil tankers, right? And we have found like lots of influence on land use and mixed urban design on travel behavior, because people are taking mostly like walking to nearest Walmart, which is kind of street level. Some other key issues is like key existing issues is a low connectivity. Low connectivity means a very less like streets and nodes available there. At some point, we also have seen lots of informal pathways on that study area. So connectivity gets very low. There are no formal crossing, like long. There is no like formal crossing for long distance. That's why people are doing like mid-block crossing, as you can see on those photos. So for this existing condition review or like transportation analysis, we do require lots of data, transportation data. Mostly like we use transportation tomorrow survey data that has trip distance, OD pattern, trip purpose, mode share data. We also have purchased GPS-based real-time data just to understand both multimodal counts and travel pattern for commercial vehicles as well. We have also TTC transit ridership counts, turning movement counts for both vehicle counts and pedestrian and cycling counts. We have also used transit demand forecasting based on EMI model. We do have mid-block counts, just count like manually we counted there. And we have like citywide bike app data that is conducted. That was conducted, I think, 2015. So based on those data, we had done demand forecasting because this is for active transportation demand forecasting for both potential demand and future demand. So potential demand is when we know about the short trips, right? So we know about that total trips, there are certain portion, like at least 30% of the total trips are like short trips. So we found that here short trips are more than 30%. We found almost 40% is short trips. So we counted as from those short trips, we extract those as from auto trips mostly. And assign those trips as a potential active transportation trips. So that's how we find the potential demand for active transportation, both cycling and pedestrian. If it's like less than 1 kilometer trip, we kind of calculated as a pedestrian trip, and if it's like more than 1 kilometer but less than 3 kilometer, we consider as a cycling trip. So that is the way we have generated the forecasted future trips for this study area. And based on those demand and forecasting demand, we just compare with existing demand versus like future potential demand for not only the signalized intersection based, but also that link wise as well. So we have the demand generated to the link as well using the GIS math, like ArcGIS tools. We just use those and find out this demand for pedestrian and cycling. So we found almost like 5 to 6 times higher demand for pedestrian on those links than the existing condition. Similarly, cycling demand, current demand is very low. Only we have like, since we have currently cycling a lane on Sentinel, we have only higher demand on Sentinel. But other than Sentinel, there are not much demand. So, but once we have a model set up and then we converted those trips and we add up those transit trips as well. So we found that the demand is pretty high. So that also included the both link demand and the intersection demand as well. So we also done worksheet analysis using the ArcGIS shortest path method. So this is also can compare what is the existing, like based on the current streets, what is the existing workshed and what is the existing pedestrian and can be served within 10 kilometer, within 1 kilometer buffer distance from the transit stations. We find we can almost serve more than 1.5 times like more people than the existing streets with the future streets plan. So in order to guide and plan for the future, we have currently, based on the context, we have some policies set up for this secondary plan, because it's a transit node, as you can see. The most of the policies based on like transit supportive policies, mentioning that transit supportive, providing convenient access and connection to transit stops, ensuring a broad mix of land uses. Also, connectivity creates new connections and reduce block size. So we have like large blocks because of the employment lands. So our vision is to reduce the block size and create new connections. Major public streets, we want to improve public realm and providing, as I mentioned, like complete streets based on principles. So dedicated cycling infrastructure and more street furnitures. Provide a wide and unobstructed pedestrian clearway to go and from transit station. Primary streets also will provide imported connectivity and capacity. So we consider that. We also consider secondary streets that will enhance porosity and provide access to new developments. As transit plan is coming to effect, so we are leveraging those new transit infrastructure. So new public streets will have right of way at least 20 to like 20 meter to up to 27 meters. We also propose like a plan for dedicated bike like cycling routes will be supplemented by secondary cycling routes. And we have also direct pedestrian connection to transit stations that will be provided wherever it is possible, and using those development applications as a tool. TDM plans will also minimize the parking requirements will be required. So as I mentioned, like complete street typology or like multimodal streets, we have citywide guideline as you have seen from Niki and Shekat's presentation. So we have citywide guideline for different types of complete street typology. So we mostly use those guidelines and assess those streets in this study area, which street could fit within that typology. And we have seen that mostly like shared street would get good fit for those neighborhoods and local areas. But for the employment lands and employment zones, we have used like employment streets, mixed use lanes, those sort of types. But in general, this is like complete streets or multimodal streets. So after those complete street typology assessment, we plan for a public street. So as you can see here, mostly like major streets connecting to the site, and then the local streets or secondary streets fitting into those major streets. Cycling connection also we have identified, and then there are also some citywide cycling network plan. They already planned for those as a part of Finch West LRT plan, and some of the transit-based cycling plan. Transportation demand management plan. So as a part of the secondary plan, we also try to understand how to reduce those travel demand and better enable the multimodal travel pattern and reduce those travel demand and vehicle usage, and to ensure better utilization of parking usage, right? So, as you can see, mostly it's concentrated on those transit stations like Finch West stations and Sentinel station for LRT, mostly like bike share, car share, and electric vehicles, carpool stations proposed as a kind of eco-mobility hub. So the hub will perform as like consolidated for all those like multimodal first and last mile strategies for transportation demand management measures. So after all this done, we kind of designed those street as a multimodal street using those principles. And as you can see here, existing condition for Kill Street northbound at Finch Avenue, and you can see the conceptual cross sections. But this is just only conceptual. Of course, we have our design and implementation team to use that conceptual design and then build it as per needed for the city. And you can see some of the like artistic drawing, and so what you can foresee are like what we can future can see those areas to be reshaped or like revitalized based on those principles and based on the policies and those conceptual design. So this one is actually north view of Kill and Finch. And this one also another street, which is a Park Street, currently as a lane, but we planned for future as a Park Street and as a shared street. So as you can see, people are moving with the vehicles, so as a shared approach with all modes. That's it. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sheikh. So I'm going to go ahead and bring us back, and we can bring back all the speakers, perhaps. First off, a gigantic round of applause for everyone who can do so, as a big thank you to all of our speakers for coming out and delivering excellent presentations. At this point, I think we can open everything up to questions. So the way that this is going to work is, if you do have a question that you'd like to ask the speakers, please raise your hand. I have the participants list open here. Hopefully this shows up okay on the live stream. So I'll call on you to unmute yourself. If you're watching on the live stream on YouTube Live, you can type your question up in the chat, and I'll make sure that it gets relayed to the speakers. So at this point, any questions? Oh, okay, I have one from Tanvir. So Tanvir, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hi team, thank you for giving me the opportunity for asking the question. I would like to thank all the speakers for giving a nice.
Who always asks the question in ITE meetings or seminars?
Is it hearing somehow? Hello. Sorry, I think I have got disconnected somehow.
No, we have you. Oh.
Is it okay now?
Yep, we can. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So my question was to Shaikat and also Niki on the COVID response. And also the project what they are doing on the Danforth road. I'm very much really interested to see that the outcome of that project. I have a small query. You guys have mentioned that you guys are going to do a public consultation based on the pedestrian perspective, also cyclists and other users perspective. I just wanted to know how you guys are planning to incorporate that into the planning or the design implementation of the project.
Thanks, Tanvir. I'll try to answer that question. So to be frank, like we started public consultation on this project in 2019. There were probably 2 public meetings. One was like pre-COVID physical kind of like public meeting, and there was one virtual in early 2020. And so this is the upcoming public meeting that we are going to probably have sometime in December. That would be one aspect would obviously be the evaluation of the complete street strategy that or the implementation that we showed you. But there would also be consultation on the planning aspect of the study, which I probably briefly mentioned, mostly on the build form along Danforth. So that would be part of the consultation aspect for this study as well. And there might be more consultation next year on the like how we are going to be like wrapping up the pilot and recommending to the city council, which we hope to report on sometime in fall 2021. So probably sometime between now and next summer, there will be another set of consultation on all those aspects. And all of these, we are planning to do a virtual consultation that's been done all over the city now.
It sounds amazing to me. I'm sorry, Shaikat, I have few more queries. Can I add that?
Sure.
Yeah. I have another query is that I saw that in one of the image that for due to the COVID-19, you guys are suppose for the patio, city has some patio plan, like how they should set up the patio and also on the shared space on just in front of the student restaurants areas.
Mm-hmm.
I am just wondering, I saw that city has already approved for lots of restaurants to open the patio options rather than sitting arrangement inside the restaurant area. I'm just wondering that how is there any study have done how the transmission, if we set up the patio on the open space or something like that, if even they follow the 2 meter that social distancing, whether is there any possibility of the transmission of COVID-19, or is there something some study have done already, or is there any plan for that?
I can start to answer
yeah,
this.
Niki, go ahead.
The project, the Danforth study was building off of the separate initiative in the City of Toronto, which is Cafe TO, and Cafe TO was developed in consultation with our public health officials. And I think the more we learned about this virus, the more we understood that transmission rates are much, much less in an open air environment, which is how we ended up with a recommendation to support businesses using these outdoor spaces and with the creation of Cafe TO ultimately, which was built into the Danforth study. That has been in place for quite some time now. Patios are actually closing in mid-November in the City of Toronto, but there has been a recommendation for staff to look at supporting businesses through winter-friendly patios. And I think that that starts to, of course, create a new balance of having semi-enclosed spaces that are serving patrons. And of course, so that is, of course, being in consultation with our public health officials as well.
So I can probably just add one more point to it, that like as Niki mentioned, that we implemented all those patios based on the consultation with the Toronto Public Health, but actual recommendation or approval came from the province. So province, I'm not sure if they did a study, but they basically did the health aspect of the study, the health aspect of all these patios, and they approved the patio installation first, and then city basically followed through. And
thank you,
interestingly, when we were working on the patio design, like Niki probably mentioned it in her presentation, that all these were in the process. We didn't get the approval, but we had to deliver something to keep the businesses on Danforth like vibrant, like surviving through the COVID. So we accommodated all that, and fortunately, the timing of the approval from the province and the city public health worked with this process.
Okay, that's really good to know. I have one more last question actually. That one is, if as a transportation engineer, if we are thinking to do any study on this thing, how should we proceed actually? What are the application we should follow, and how should we do the study? Here I know we have lots of undergrad students. It could be helpful for them even to get the idea actually how, if we want to do some study on this type of unexpected events, or something like as you mentioned that it's came from the provincial, and you guys, none of we even know that whether there was any study have done on this thing. Can you guide us on this?
Sure, Tanvir. Your question is pretty broad, I would say. There could be probably tons of answers. None of those would be incorrect. So I'd probably try my best to answer, and then Niki can probably add more. So like from pure transportation point of view, like just from transportation point of view, taking everything else, I see this is a, like, obviously accommodating all the aspects of complete street and all that, but I see this is as a like huge increase in terms of active transportation users. Like say, for example, the bike volume on Danforth, it raised from somewhere around 1,000 per day to 3,000 per day. Pedestrian volume and kind of the pedestrian safety aspects in terms of those curb extensions, the new mid-block crossing that we are going to probably recommending through this pilot, all those like increases huge safety aspect and the complete street aspect, and that basically changes ultimately the way people commute and probably go into those areas like as a like placemaker. And like you can take a look at our website, and that has got plenty of information, and you can probably like if you're interested, we can probably share some of the data in terms of like traffic volume and many other stuff, which you could probably crunch and come up with lots of analysis aspects and then come up with your like result, which would also help the city in formulating some of the future stuff. If Niki want to add anything.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if the question meant how are we going to be looking at it from a city point of view, or how students could study the project. Could you clarify?
Actually, yeah, you could actually give us idea from both perspectives. Then everyone, all of we could understand, I think.
Yeah, well, in our presentation, we got into some of the evaluation criteria we have for the project. So there's quite a few criteria we listed there that we'll be looking at, and that's looking at the project from a safety point of view, from an economic point of view, from a traffic point of view. So we're looking at it from quite a few different angles here, and that has been informed by just how we've measured many pilots around the city, as well as public and stakeholder feedback. In terms of how it could form a separate grad school project or something like that, I think that the city has a lot of open data opportunities with respect to the counts we'll be doing. And so looking at it from that point of view, I think it would be a little more challenging to measure economic impact and perception, as that's the type of stuff that requires a larger scale survey that we'll also be doing for the study.
That's great to know. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
Okay, got another question from Ushash. Go ahead.
Thanks, Niki and Jacob, for your presentation. Wonderful presentation. The video helped us a lot to visualize the whole process of the Danforth project. So I think we had a question from one of our faculty regarding the video. Is it available on YouTube or any open source media platform?
It will be. It's not available yet. We gave you a sneak peek. We're still working on 2 versions of the video and making it fully accessible, at which point we'll have a YouTube link available. That's probably a couple weeks away.
Perfect. Thank you. Looking forward to it.
I also noted that one of the attendees, I believe Professor Peter, he wanted to have a link to our presentation, so we can send it to you guys and then you can share it. There's no problem at all.
That'll be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, are there any other questions? Okay, I have a couple questions of my own. First one's going to be for Niki and Saikat, and then the next one's going to be for Mohammed and Paul. So with regards to active TO in the Danforth, especially now that things are getting colder, I have snow out my window right now. What's the winterization plan for the Danforth going forward?
Could you answer?
Sure, yeah. So we're currently planning for the patio takedown for patios that are in the roadway. The design, in order to accommodate maintenance vehicles, we have to go back to the cycle track being curbside. And also, as part of the Cafe TO program, the program was only set to be in the roadway until mid-November. So we are currently planning on the removal of patios in the roadway. However, given the current state of the pandemic and the clear need to continue to support businesses in open air environments, Council has directed staff to look at winter patio options. And so on the Danforth, we're currently awaiting the results of that, which I anticipate might result in more patio spaces that are year-round rather than just summer patios. And we're also looking at how to design and store our pilot elements that were used for the patio spaces in a way that is coherent along the corridor over winter, respects maintenance issues over winter, such as snow clearance, and is also readily available should the program return in the spring to, again, expand patios into the roadway, which is also going to council in an evaluation report very soon. And I think that given the success of the Cafe TO program, we're anticipating it should come back in the spring. And so holding those materials on the street over winter is important to get them quickly back out in the spring.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so my next question is for Mohammed and Paul regarding parking management. What impact do you think autonomous vehicles might have with a historic village like, or a historic main street like Kleinburg Village, especially with relation to like where people might try to park? Would it switch to perhaps like just a drop-off model?
Paul, would you like to try that one?
Sure, I'll give it a shot, and you can back me up if I falter. But yeah, I think that would probably prove advantageous. It might support more strongly the idea of parking more externally to the historic district as opposed to within it. It could be that the centralized parking facility that we're planning could serve as some form of pickup and drop-off facility as opposed to just purely a parking facility. And then that way people could have that as the centralized station and then walk into the village from that point. Or of course, you know, we still anticipate some vehicles in the long term still being allowed in and out of the village. There still has to be local traffic. So of course, residents could also still use their in the future, you know, autonomous vehicle to access their property, or their visitors could do so as such. But I think it would more strongly support the idea of parking around the village and then moving within it to by foot to explore it.
Yeah, I can agree with that, because it's again, as we said, that improvement within the village in order to get there it's going to remain to be implemented, including the autonomous vehicle and building those stations that may also help, and or charging station in those centralized places so that people can use that type of vehicle and use maybe those micro-mobility, what we mentioned, and share mobility to go through the village and enjoy it. So yeah, I think it's the future, and kind of like that will support more pedestrian-oriented Kleinburg village.
Awesome. Thank you very much, both. Are there any other questions at this point? No other questions? Okay, well, I do think that we are about 15 minutes late at this point, because we did go a bit over time. Sorry about that. But I think excellent presentations by all. Can we get another round of applause for all of our presenters? Thank you, everyone. Okay, so just a couple things of business, and perhaps the reason why I asked the autonomous vehicles question is our next series, our next seminar will be on autonomous vehicles. That date is still to be determined. We've had one scheduling conflict come up, so we're still trying to figure out the precise date, but we will communicate that to you when it happens. And also, to sort of relax before finals kick off, we are planning on hosting an ITE game night. We will be playing Among Us with Discord voice chat as well. That's probably planned for around the 27th. The time still remains to be determined. But if you are enjoying these videos, if you're on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe and keep up to date in the know as to what's coming up soon. And if you're not yet on campus groups, please join us on campus groups as well. If you have any feedback, you can send us an email at it's ITE, let me just move that out of the way, ITE@my.yorku.ca. We always like to hear what your feedback is. Thank you once again to our excellent presenters for coming out, and thank you to all of the directors who made this possible. And finally, thank you to all of our participants who came out to watch. We hope you enjoyed the seminar. Thank you, everyone. I think we can hereby bring everything to a close. So thank you. Stay healthy. Stay safe. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.